Hello everyone. Over the last couple of episodes, we have been talking about Spanish history beginning at the end of the 15th century and the cultural changes that this encounter between the Spanish and Mexica created. But today we are going to push the chronology back a bit to the years shortly before Cortez's conquest of the Aztecs in the 1520s. In the beginning phases of the Spanish conquest of America, there was so much unknown. For example, Columbus believed he landed somewhere in Asia. This is why he named the peoples he encountered Indians. And this is why the Caribbean region historically had the name of the West Indies. Now, the Europeans drew their understanding of the world from a mix of biblical and classical sources, classical meaning Greeks and Romans. In the European mentality, all the lands lying beyond those lands mentioned in the Bible was effectively the Indies. They believed that the rest of the world beyond this biblical core was just covered in very large islands. These islands were filled with spices, precious metals, and all sorts of monstrosities, including griffins, dragons, and venomous serpents, but also many mystical and pseudo-human things. There were stories of all-women societies of Amazons lying somewhere out there. Many people believe giants existed somewhere out there in the world as well.
The ancient Greek poet Homer spoke about the existence of monsters. In the epic poem of the Odyssey, Odysseus encountered the Cyclops, a primitive man-eating savage. Odysseus also encountered the sirens, humanoid, mermaidish, Slaaneshi, temptresses, who lured sailors in with their mesmeric voices. Later Greek historians such as Herodotus and Ctesias also talked about monsters living beyond the known world. The first century Roman author, Pliny, also argued that the lands of the East were populated with monsters. Moreover, these monsters all had their origins as normal humans who transformed over time into monstrous beings. In the medieval ages, Augustine of Hippo and Isidore of Seville believed monsters were part of God's creation, that monsters devolved from Adam and Eve.
Collectively, the entire arc of human evolution, even though evolution was not a phrase used at this time, what I mean by evolution is that the entire range of human development, from full human, half human to non-human, was believed to be out there in the world. And not only that, all sorts of human-animal hybrids. And to some extent, this idea always existed in Western civilization. Take the Sphinx, for example, or the Minotaur, for example. They believed a race of dog-headed humanoids called the cynocephaly existed somewhere out there in the world.
Now they believe these things because Europeans at the dawn of the Age of Discovery believed that each person had what was known as a complexion. A person's physical appearance, their personality, their intelligence, and their morality were all believed to be a part of one's complexion. It was believed that a person's complexion was the result of many factors particular to the local environment, including the sunlight, the temperature, air, water, and terrain. One's complexion was fluid. It would change if put in a different environment. Thus, human differences were mutable, and human characteristics were dynamic, always subject to change. And this is why the stories of the humanoids, half-humans, subhumans, that we might consider outlandish in our modern times, were so widespread at the end of the medieval period. This worldview served to explain why many Europeans were cognitively primed to encounter all sorts of humans, monsters, and everything in between.
Now, it's important to keep in mind this all sounds fantastical and quaint, but keep in mind that all these beliefs in half-humans and subhumans occurred at the same exact time they are enslaving the peoples they are encountering around the world. Now, Columbus has always been sort of depicted as carrying a sort of medieval mentality everywhere he went. I portray Columbus like this as well, with his beliefs in the end of days and carrying the crusading medieval tradition with him. But in regards to what peoples he would encounter, Christopher Columbus did not believe the myths and superstitions of his day. Columbus made efforts to try to be objective and rational in his observations. Take cannibalism, for instance. Cannibalism was a theme that had deep roots in Western civilization. In antiquity, the Roman poet Ovid told mythological stories in which unknown lands were filled with cannibals. But Christopher Columbus was an experienced navigator. He dismissed such fantastical notions that were told in the ancient myths. Now, whenever Christopher Columbus landed on the island of Hispaniola and began enslaving the peoples there, he began hearing rumors that some of the peoples were cannibals. And at first, he rejected these stories from the indigenous peoples themselves. Like, no, you guys can't actually be cannibals.
At first, it seemed that Columbus was reluctant to accept he landed in a land full of cannibals. I mean, according to medieval travel literature, Cyclopses and Cynocephali were suspected to inhabit the lands of the East, but this would be an absolute disappointment for him, and consequently, the Spanish monarchy. He had hoped to find the great Khan of Cathay, Cathay being North China. He had hoped to find a land of immeasurable wealth, a land of innumerable troops and other resources that could be put to the crown's cause. He had hoped to see signs of civilization, not primitive savagery. This would mean he was a failure. He failed himself. He failed the Catholic monarchs of Spain. Christoferens, the Christ-bearer, had also failed God. But instead, he found opportunity. A land of cannibals could still serve the interests of the Spanish monarchy. It turns out that a land of cannibals was the perfect justification to enslave the people he encountered and to take their lands.
And many more misconceptions would be clarified. Take, for example, another Italian, Amerigo Vespucci. Amerigo truly coined the American hemisphere as the New World because Columbus only saw Asia. He believed he landed in Asia. Columbus did not believe the American hemisphere was a quote-unquote New World. It was Amerigo. He basically said Columbus was wrong. This is an entirely unknown world to us. This is a new world to us. And this, of course, is where America derives its name from, because the Latinized form of Amerigo is Americas. Hence, America, North America, South America, United States of America. The idea of a brand new world, undiscovered from the European perspective, only served to fuel the imaginations of Europeans and what they would encounter out there. Now, this new world became a blank canvas for Europeans to paint their imagination on. Let's take the first exploration to Florida, for example. Originally, Florida was believed to be an island when the Spanish conquistador Juan Ponce de León encountered this landmass between 1512 and 1513, around 10 years before Cortés conquered the Aztecs. And historians disagree as to exactly how Florida received its name. Some say that whenever de León landed in Florida, it was really close to the Spanish Easter holiday. In fact, some historians allege that the original name of Florida was La Pascua Florida, or the Festival of Flowers for you barbarians. Other historians disagree and basically said, like, no, it was just a lot of flowers, and the name La Florida derives from the fact that de León christened the area to be, quote, the place of flowers. Now, Ponce de León was not able to establish a permanent Spanish settlement on Florida. That would come later. But de León's stories would take on mythical proportions. Many would claim that de León was searching for the supposed fountain of youth, a fountain which would either reverse your aging or make you immortal. And the idea of a fountain of youth was on the minds of Europeans as they set out to explore the unknown. The idea that there is a fountain of youth somewhere out there appears in the letters of Prester John. Prester John being the mythical Christian king of some Asian or African kingdom somewhere out there in the world. But the idea of a fountain of youth goes back ages. In fact, one of the oldest novels, the quote Alexander Romance, featured an episode with the fountain of youth. Along the winding story of Alexander the Great's rise to greatness and a world conqueror, there is a brief episode where he, Alexander, discovers the fountain of immortality in Asia. But we could trace the idea of a fountain of youth all the way back to an ancient Greek poet known as Homer. According to Homer, the sorceress and priestess Medea used waters from the fountain of life to revive an ancient Greek king. But this ancient Greek king was the father of the legendary Jason of the Argonauts. The Argonauts were a famous crew of explorers, including Jason and also Hercules. They were on a mission to fetch the Golden Fleece from King Aetes of Colchis. The Golden Fleece was a mythical object every bit worthy of such an adventure. And on their way to retrieve the Golden Fleece, the Argonauts made several stops, encountering all sorts of wild creatures and beasts. At the Isle of Lemnos, the Argonauts encountered a tribe of murderous heroines. In the land of the Dolions, the Argonauts encountered a tribe of mountain giants known as the Gigantomachy, but thankfully Hercules was there to drax them before they were able to foil our heroes. In Thrace, the Argonauts encountered the Harpies, which they rooted out. Now the Argonauts eventually reached their destination, but before they are able to get the Golden Fleece, the king who is guarding the Golden Fleece gives them a set of tasks, one of which involved the Calcatori. These were fire-breathing, bronze-hoofed bulls. After this task was completed, Jason was to sow the field with dragon's teeth, and also defeat the stone warriors which were to be grown from the dragon's teeth. Although Jason acquires the Golden Fleece, his trials and tribulations are not over. On the way back, he encounters the Sirens, the same Sirens who also almost foiled Odysseus. At the island of Crete, the Argonauts encountered the bronze titan Talos. Now I tell you this story because stories such as these were on the minds of Europeans as they traveled the world during the Age of Discovery. The Spanish conquistadors considered themselves to be contemporary analogs to the heroes of classical mythology. Chasing after a mystical golden fleece was every bit as representative of Spain chasing gold and other riches in the American hemisphere. Columbus's letters back to Spain, the letters in which he detailed what he saw in the New World, only served to fuel the imagination of Europeans. And even sometime after Columbus's discovery, the idea of monsters continues to be discussed. Many speculate that the southern tip of South America contains a race of giants. And the reason for this is that giants were a regular type of monster encountered in the unknown world in classical mythology. But giants were also a core element of the well-established mythology of ancient times. Take the Gigantomachy, for instance, or Gigantomachy. In Theogony, the ancient Greek poet Hesiod details the origins of the gods. And accordingly, the earth goddess Gaia bore children, one of which was Uranos, a sky god. She on Uranos mated and produced 12 titans, 3 cyclopses, and 3 hecatoncheires, which were huge creatures with hundreds of hands and dozens of heads. Now, each generation of Gaian's children attempted to mate with her and, in the process, kill their fathers, children, and cousins. At this point in mystical history, Zeus is one of the gods born from this process. Zeus overthrew the Titans, and Zeus ushered in an age of civility and peace. Now, in other stories of the Greek cosmology, Gaia's progeny were known as gigantes. These were giant hybrids. Some of them had snake tails and other sort of monstrous characteristics. And these giants also fought Zeus and the Olympians. Now the Gigantomachy sets up an opposition, that of the peace-loving gods and those of the violent giants. But additionally, those people who derived from the Olympians were peaceful, while those who derived from the giants were violent, brutish, and savage.
The Spanish never did discover any monsters, but the natives did. It turns out the monsters were less teeth, claws, and fangs, and more Baroque, Latin, and godly.
Now, what all these stories reveal is that the European mentality at the cusp of the Age of Discovery was informed by all sorts of medieval and classical stories of monsters and other unknown creatures. This was the framework for discovery that the Europeans had. Just as how the Roman Empire was one of the only models for creating a global community and global empire, so too were the classical myths one of the only sources of knowledge to conceive of others around the world. At the Age of Discovery, the only people who had encountered strange and unknown peoples were the Greeks, were the Romans, or a one-off traveler such as Marco Polo or John Mandeville. And this is one of the reasons why there was such a strong attachment to the ideas of classical antiquity. And it's one of the reasons why the Spanish often compared themselves to classical figures.